Just over a year ago, we built these raised beds that you see behind me for 30 bucks a piece. Today, we're gonna go over if it was a waste of time or if these things have actually been worth the money that we spent on them. What's going on, everybody? Jack here at the Mindful Homestead, and today we're gonna do a little bit of talking about our raised beds. So last year we had a banner first year, and years prior we had planted our seeds directly in the ground. The area that was dedicated to our garden when we moved in was very low and very wet. In addition to being not the best place for a garden in general because of how low and wet it was, it also sat under a few pine trees that shaded it and dropped their needles in it every year, which created a very acidic soil situation. The acidic soil situation is relatively easy to mitigate, but the problems that we were running into were shade and just a poor quality of soil in general and a ton of wetness. So we brought in a few dump trucks worth of fill, and we actually raised up this side of the yard about 1.5 feet. And that took care of the moisture problem. The issue that we ran into then was that we used fill to do it because fill was cheap, and that was the best bang for the buck as far as raising the level of the ground. Next problem we ran into there was that you don't want to plant anything in fill, and to amend fill to be good for planting, it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of amendments to that soil, and it wasn't something we were really interested in. So getting raised beds in here was a big priority for us. We looked at it as giving us the ability to really decide what we wanted to use for a soil and start fresh at a good level versus trying to bring what we had into spec for planting. So I got my pencil out, I put together some plans, I looked at lumber prices, and we ended up building these 4x8 raised beds for $30 a piece. I'll put a link to the video that I made with the plans for these raised beds up here in the corner. You can definitely check that out and let us know what you think. And we got a lot of feedback after I put that video out about using regular pine for these and not pressure treated or not cedar, and how it just wasn't going to last. So I wanted to do a little bit of an update video and recap if we were to do it again now, any changes we might make. So how did they do in their first year? Well, they performed pretty wonderfully. We had a great supplier of soil. There's a local landscape supply company. They're down in Milford, New Hampshire, and they have a loam compost mix that they were able to supply to us. That worked out really well for us. We were able to fill these things up relatively inexpensively with a good mix that was going to provide the nutrients for the plants that we were planting. We also got lucky in that a local tree care company that I work with was able to provide us with a whole ton of wood chips that we laid down first under all of these raised beds before we put the raised beds on top. And that did a couple things. One, it gave us nice paths to walk down, which isn't so much of a big deal. It does make the garden look nice. But the second thing it did was it gave us a nice draining base at the bottom. We didn't have to put gravel or pea stone or anything like that in the bottom of our beds. We were able to just put the wood chips down, throw the raised beds on top, and then fill the raised beds, and everything worked out just great. So let's get into the raised beds themselves though, and how they've held up over the first year of use. So far, everything is holding together really well. The construction and the plans that I kind of came up with and the way I built them, there's not really much to come apart. I wasn't putting screws into any end grain. They were all going into a reinforcement on the corner that was made of 1x1 pressure treated baluster. There's no way for these things to really come apart unless they were to get fully rotten, which, being untreated pine, I expect that to probably be 5 or 6 years from now. Being untreated pine, they did take on a kind of cool looking gray patina. As the tannins in the wood start to oxidize, you do get that traditional grayed out barnwood type look. I know that they're just raised beds and they're in the garden, but it is kind of cool to look outside and see a cool old looking piece of wood making up your raised bed. So that's kind of nice. But as far as going around and looking at them, I don't see any signs of insect damage yet. I don't see any signs of rot or anything like that. It's just a year in. They are sitting on the ground, so eventually that sort of thing may be a problem. We'll have insects get in there and things like that. But for now, everything's working out pretty well, and we're kind of psyched on how they turned out. So what would we do different if we were to build these today? When we built these raised beds, I did the math. The 4x8 beds, each one cost us $30.50. And that was approximately $4 for the 1x1 balusters that fit in the corners and then along the sides of support. And then for the wood to actually make up the sides of the raised beds, there was approximately $26 in those. Each one uses 6 2x6s that are 8 feet long apiece. So for $30.50, you had a bed that held just over a yard of dirt and measured at 4x8 by about a foot deep. Now, when I built these, I looked at pressure treated lumber. It would have added approximately $12 to the cost of each one. Now, per raised bed, $12 doesn't sound like much, but when you start getting into an entire garden of raised beds that you're building all at once, it adds up pretty quickly. For the entire garden to upgrade to pressure treated lumber, it was going to cost us about $90 more. $90 isn't a lot, but we were kind of shoestringing this anyway, so it wasn't really in the cards at the time. Now, before shooting this video, I did go back and I repriced out the lumber based on a natural pine versus a pressure treated wood. And the numbers were a little bit different than they were a year ago. So now to build these out of pine, you're still looking at $30.50, which isn't a lot of money. $30.50 is pretty good for a 4x8 raised bed. To build them out of pressure treated, your price now is only $36.82. So you're looking at about $6 more this year to build a raised bed out of pressure treated lumber. Just for fun, I did also price out 2x6 cedar, and your price to build these things out of 2x6 red cedar would be $116 a piece. So definitely a huge jump if you want to build these things out of cedar. Granted, you're using an all natural wood that's going to last a really long time, but for $116 a piece, you're talking a whole lot of money to build a garden of raised beds with that. So now you're saying, Jack, if you were going to rebuild these today, you would use pressure treated, right? That's a really tough question. I did a lot of research into pressure treated wood, and obviously back in the day, they used a ton of nasty chemicals that you would never want to put anywhere near food. Arsenic was a big one that was in pressure treated lumber a while ago. The main ingredient in a modern pressure treated solution is copper, which is not really that bad. We use copper in a lot of pipes in our house to carry water. There's copper cookware out there. There's a lot of things that touch food that are made with copper. Not a bad thing, right? There hasn't been a ton of research out there on whether or not a modern pressure treated piece of lumber is safe for food contact. Obviously, if you're cutting it, they say wear a face mask, wear hand protection, wash your hands after you're done touching it. But there hasn't been a lot of studies out there to say, hey, if you make a raised bed out of pressure treated lumber, is any of that solution going to leach into your food, and is that food then bad for you? I don't know if we were to rebuild these beds now if we would use pressure treated or not. It's really kind of a call that needs to be up to you. Depending on how many you make and how much money you're going to save, the cost savings is a lot different now than it was a year ago when we built these. So I can't necessarily say we would definitely use standard untreated pine. However, I do have reservations about using pressure treated wood where even if it was the same cost, that's something I would kind of go back and forth with in my head. Obviously, those pressure treated raised beds are going to last you a lot longer, but at what price in the long term to your health, possibly? Now, we have gotten a lot of really good suggestions on how we could have treated these things to last a lot longer. One of the more interesting ones that I saw was actually using a propane weed torch to essentially burn the outside of these, not necessarily light them on fire, but just put a light char on them. And that was something that in the future I think we'll definitely be interested in. I know that because we didn't use pressure treated lumber or cedar that we are going to have to replace these things in 5 to 6 years. They're going to get bugs in them. It's just the nature of what's going to happen with them. You know, as homesteaders, we're doing this sort of thing to get a better product than what you would find in the stores. And keeping all organic practices in your garden while having a raised bed that's made of pressure treated lumber, it could be safe, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable with that. Ultimately, it's going to be a choice of whether or not you're okay with replacing these things every 5 years. Obviously, pressure treated is going to last you upwards of 20 years. but you do have to worry about the solution that's in that pressure treated wood and if it's something you want next to your food. Let us know down in the comments below if you're planning on building raised beds for this year and how you're going to build them. Are you going to treat your wood to keep it lasting longer, or are you just going to go with raw pine or slab lumber from your own property? Post down below and let us know what you're doing in your garden. We'd love to hear about it. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button down below and hit that little bell. It'll give you notifications every time we upload a new video. We try to come out with new videos twice a week. Thanks for watching. We hope you all have a great day. Bye.